Success leaves clues, ladies and gentlemen. Part 2. In our previous episode, we talked about a lot of folks that are on our level at some extent that I knew, but now it's time to get down and dirty with Tim. Welcome back to the podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Grow with Tim, here with JDew and
Tim Joyner.
And we're talking about Success Leaves Clues. This is part 2. It's a twofer here, so if you haven't heard us in our previous episode, get back in there. Now, Tim, this time I want to grill you. You made me come up with some folks and give all the dirty deets on some of the folks that I've known and met and worked with, and really on a personal level have realized, you know what? These folks have a level of success that I have not achieved yet. What can I learn from them?
Yet being the operative word, right? You haven't achieved yet.
Yet.
Correct. That's right.
Yet.
That's right.
So some of those things, right, I think I have achieved somewhat of a level of success because several of the folks that I did mention, I've known now for around a decade. Mm-hmm. So hopefully, yes, I've picked up on a few of those things that I mentioned. But now we're going to turn the tables to you, sir, a little bit. So we didn't hear as much about, we heard the topics from you. And what you could pull from them. Maybe I'll say, okay, here's the thing we pull, but I want to hear your stories.
So you mentioned last week, it's easy to kind of take it for granted, right? Your life becomes normal to you and you forget. But when I started thinking about all the people that I've had a chance to interact with, it's really quite remarkable. And I count that a great privilege. Like, it's not because I'm some special, amazing person, but I've had the chance to talk to multi-millionaires, billionaires even, not just talk to them like say hi and shake their hand, but like have deep and extended conversations with them. And so what we want to do today is, or at least what I want to do today, I don't know what you want to do, but what I want to do today.
Here's one question that actually already popped up. Did you have to go golfing to meet these people? Because I don't golf. That's how everyone else talks about it.
So when I was in college and I decided I was going to pursue entrepreneurship and business, I decided that I really needed to learn to do two things that I didn't know how to do. One was drink coffee. The other was play golf, right? And I've more or less figured out the coffee thing. Okay. I don't know that I ever tasted coffee until college, and now I can go to a coffee shop with the best of them. So I've learned that one. Okay. Golf, not so much. I just had to figure out
around
other
this time
ways.
Last year, you actually gifted our family and my wife with some nice coffee.
That's right. Yeah,
yes.
That's right.
So, and I don't drink coffee. Right. Maybe that's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. There's the success clue that you need to get from us so far is coffee wasn't natural. It's an acquired taste, apparently.
No, I probably have 2 or 3 coffee meetings a week. I used to have a lot more before I had back in the early days before I had dedicated office space. I had like 3 or 4 coffee meetings a day, and so I really had to learn to drink coffee. Right. So anyway, all right. So what I want to do today is talk about some people that are maybe not like way out there. Okay. Not the billionaires. Right. But the people that started out the same way that you and I did. Okay. They didn't
handsome. Tall and dark. They started out obviously, right? So what? And I specifically want to talk about 1 or 2 things that I've learned from each one of those. So, I've told you before, I love asking questions. I've had a recent short where I talked about success for me is finishing my food before my lunch companion, right? Mm-hmm. Because that means that I've listened more than I've talked. I've asked lots of questions. So I like to ask questions. I like to learn from other people. Right. And I went through and I thought about 5 or 6 really extraordinarily successful people that I've had a chance to interact with, and in some of the things that I've learned from them. And so I'm gonna tell you some stories. Yes. Now, I want to hear some stories, and I also want to hear, because you made me do it, what about them was success? I'm sure you'll tell us, right? Yeah. But what about them do you feel was that success component that they had figured out? Yeah. And then, yes, I want to be able to steal these ideas without even meeting these people yet, and use them for myself.
So number 1 on my list is Dan Sullivan. Many of you have met Dan. You've read his books. He's published, 24 books or something. Right. He is on multiple podcasts. He's all over the place. Dan Sullivan has probably influenced my entrepreneurial journey more than just about anybody else on the planet. I've been reading his books now for over a decade. I've met Dan a number of times. I've had dinner at his home. I've had lunch with him multiple times. So it's not like we're close friends, but I certainly know him better than most, and I've learned a lot from him. And Dan is the founder of Strategic Coach. So this is an organization that coaches high-level entrepreneurs and really all over the globe. And they've got offices in Toronto and Chicago and I think London and maybe Melbourne, Australia, if I remember right, all over the place. And really successful guy is coached. I mean, he's the leading authority on coaching entrepreneurs. He's coached thousands and thousands, and he's got a system of associate coaches and so on. If you've not looked up Strategic Coach, check it out. You'll be glad you did. But so what do I learn from Dan Sullivan? I think 2 ideas come to the fore. We could be here all day talking about stuff I've learned from Dan Sullivan.
You've been with Strategic Coach now for at least
about
a decade.
Yeah, about that. Right. Yeah. Okay. Once a quarter, I fly to Chicago.
These are the 2 things.
Once a quarter, I fly to Chicago and get a day full of great stuff, right? All right, 2 things. Number 1, who, not how. We've talked about that before on this podcast. I won't take long, but if you're like most, highly capable, talented entrepreneurs, you tend to think, how am I going to do this? How am I going to solve this problem? How am I going to find that money? How am I going to acquire this new skill? How am I going to seize this opportunity or make this threat go away or whatever? You're always figuring out how to do stuff because you're a resourceful person. And Dan Sullivan, more than anybody else, has taught me to think not how, but who. So rather than me spend a lot of time and effort figuring out something, why don't I just find a who that already knows how to do it? They're already good at it. They're going to be way faster and better and probably more efficient and cheaper.
Right.
Why don't I just stroke a check and hire that who, either as an employee or as a contractor or a vendor, or, I mean, there's any number of different ways to make it happen. But I need to be looking for who's, and as I grow my network of who's, man, I can go much farther, faster, better, achieve a lot more by having this whole network of who's, each of whom are really good at what they do. And I'm just sort of the quarterback that coordinates.
So here's
the play.
my question about that. 2 things. Number 1, I don't think prior to you telling me about this philosophy and book, because I got it and went through it and was like, wow, this is groundbreaking. 2 questions. 1, I've never heard this concept, I don't think, outside of Dan or any other
you
place.
have, but in different ways. You've heard of delegation, right?
Okay.
Everybody says delegate. The difference between what Dan's talking about with who, not how, and delegation is that delegation is like giving it to someone who is less talented and less skilled, like somebody that you give it to an assistant who doesn't know what you do, who makes a less hourly, really talented. I'm not in any way diminishing assistants. I couldn't get anything done without an assistant. Love working with assistants. But delegation is giving it to somebody who is not as good as you are. But elevating it to a who is finding somebody who is actually better than you are, who's going to do it better, faster, cheaper, smarter, with better results. That's the concept of who, not how. And I agree, not very many people talk about that.
Yeah, really great. The second question about this is how long into the... I have a feeling that the Who, Not How book is not actually that old. And I don't know.
It's fairly new. Yeah,
it's fairly new.
Yep.
Okay, in the last couple of years, I guess. And he teaches on things, I think, for a while before he comes out with his books on them. I'm sure. Okay, but when in the 10-year journey did this kind of come to the forefront?
So I think Dan has done this for probably 2 or 3 decades, even before I knew him. Yeah. But he hasn't really been talking about it this way, as I recall, maybe 2 years or something.
Yeah.
But he does it because he has this. I think I told you before, his latest book. In fact, Who, Not How. Let's use it as an example. The book that came out, he basically had it's not a ghostwriter, a co-writer.
Yes.
Right? So Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan
how they
wrote it.
processed the book. Yeah.
So they wrote the book together, but basically Dan spent an hour or 2 on it, right? Benjamin Hardy interviewed him, asked him a bunch of questions. Dan gives him all the ideas, and then Benjamin Hardy goes out and writes it.
Right.
But Dan's name goes on the book, right? Both of them do. But the arrangement that Dan had was, look, Ben, you're going to get all the advances. You're going to get all the royalties. You're going to make all the money from selling this book. And I'm not going to take $1.
Okay. I didn't know that
part.
But
Dan Sullivan's not going to do very much work, right? He's going to spend an hour or 2 get right. But here's how Dan's going to get paid. Dan's going to get paid because people are going to read the book and join Strategic Coach. So Dan figured out that, and I think now I'm on the spot and I'm not going to get this wrong. I think the book has sold about 500,000 copies so far. I think is the right number.
But by the time you hear it, ladies and gentlemen, it could be a completely different number. So just remember that.
I think that's right. I'm not sure if that's the right number. So then, but Strategic Coach has gotten hundreds or maybe thousands of new clients, each of whom are paying anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 a year. So Dan Sullivan has made $10 or $20 million off this book probably. Ben Hardy has also made millions of dollars, but the interesting thing about it is, like, they didn't quibble about, well, I wrote how, the ideas are mine, so I should get Dan. And for Dan, Benjamin Hardy is a who. Dan didn't want to write a book, didn't know how to write a book, didn't know how to find publishing, he didn't want all that.
Right.
He says, Ben, you're a much better book writer than I am. I'm going to give you the ideas, and I'm going to lend you my name and my network, and you're going to write the book, and you're going to take all the money from the book sales, and I'm just going to get the benefit of my brand going up. Right. I think it's a brilliant example of who, not how. So Dan's been doing that for a long, long time.
He talks so much about collaboration with people.
Yeah.
I love it.
And I mean, he's got 100 and some odd people that work for him in this coaching organization, all of whom are really good at their unique ability, their specific thing that they're good at. So he's been doing this for a long time. But the book and the concept, Who Not How, which is his trademark, is maybe a couple years old.
All right. Love it.
All right. I could tell you other things from Dan. I intended to, but we got to keep moving, or we're going to spend the whole time on the first two people. Number 2 on my list is Eric Weir. So Eric is a local entrepreneur. He's a financial advisor. He's a filmmaker. Mm-hmm. He has Topgolf. I think he's got 60 or 70 Topgolfs around the world that he owns and operates.
This one as well. We're within vision and sight of Topgolf in our community.
He's got real estate developments, the big redevelopment of the Greenville News site downtown, River Place. He's behind all of that stuff. So really successful guy. So I got to spend 4 or 5 hours, well, I guess 6 or 7 hours a couple years ago with him when we had a mutual friend get married in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yes, okay.
And I got invited to go on Eric's jet. So we were both leaving from Greenville. We were both going to Milwaukee. And instead of me flying commercial, I said, absolutely, I'd love to join you on your jet. So we pull up at the airport, and you know how private aviation works.
We don't.
Well, some of you do. So you pull right up to the jet, and you get out, and you walk right, and the engines are running. That's how it works
in the music videos I've seen.
In real life, it does too.
At this point, I have not been on those flights.
You immediately take off. There's no security to clear. It's amazing. And you take off. You land not at a big airport with a big terminal, but like the little airport that's right next to, whatever's the closest. There are thousands and thousands of little airports. Anyway, I'm digressing. So you land really close. There's a car waiting with the engine running and the doors open. You get off the plane, get onto this car, and you drive wherever you're going.
We get it, Tim. What'd you learn?
Yeah, all right. So here's what I learned. Okay. I asked Eric on the way there. I said, Eric, you've been really successful, and you've been and done things in places that I want to go. What's something you know today that you wish you knew when you were my age? My favorite question. I ask that question a lot. And
eventually you'll be old enough you won't be able to be asking this question.
I know. Don't remind me. All right, so I asked him, what's something you know now that you wish you knew? And he really didn't miss a beat. He said, well, I hire a lot differently now. He says, I used to hire good people.
Okay.
They were good-hearted people. They were skilled. They were talented. They were loyal. But they were friends and family and people that knew people that I knew, and they were all good people, but they weren't necessarily the best at whatever it is that I needed them to do, whatever their role was. And he said, over time, I completely turned over my staff, my entire team pretty much. I've now hired the best. And he says he pays, I think, 10 or 15, 20, I don't remember the numbers, but he pays above market, so they're not tempted to go anywhere else. They can't leave and get a better job somewhere else. And he says it took him a couple of years to do that. And he said as he did that, he's making many times more money, a lot less stress, more free time. Like everything got better when he did that. And I said, all right, so follow-up question, you're paying above market. Like that sounds amazing, but first of all, I think I have really good people working for me. But let's suppose that I tried to go out and find rock stars.
The best, yeah.
I don't think I could afford that.
Right.
Like, were you already making enough money that you could afford? And he says, no, we went cash flow negative for a while, but it was an investment. I knew it was going to pay off. And so he actually lost money for a while he made this transition, but then they came roaring back, and he says he never looked back. So lots of other things I've learned from Eric, lots of other things, but that was the one that stood out. Like, there comes a point, you can't do that when you're just starting out. You'll go bankrupt. But there comes a point in the evolution of your business where you can't just look for the cheapest talent. You've got to look for the best, even if it means paying above market.
Right.
And it's going to come back to you.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a brilliant
thought. Best people come up with the best solutions and the best processes and all that. So it makes sense. I think we can all get that in our head. But who knew to do it, right?
Number 3 is Carlin Tucker. So Carlin runs multiple companies out of Denver, Colorado. And I first got invited to go do like an observations and recommendations audit. So I went out to evaluate his marketing. and flew out. I've told you this story before. I was really young. It was a phenomenal opportunity that I didn't deserve. I think I did create value, but I was really fortunate to get this opportunity. I landed. This was my first ever business trip. The first time I went to see him. I'd never traveled for business before. And I landed, and here's the guy with the sign, welcoming you. And there's like a black car out front, this Cadillac Escalade or something, and 30 or 40-minute drive to his office. And we get there, and there's a sign that says Tucker Financial
I'm learning
Group.
About enjoying the journey along the process, whether it's flying or landing or whatever. Apparently, I'm traveling wrong. Yeah, that's what I'm getting.
So you get there, and there's this welcome sign. It says Tucker Financial Group welcomes Tim Joyner, which was really cool. I took that, and I've used that lots of times when I have important clients or vendors come. I'll put up a welcome sign. It really makes a good first impression. But anyway, that's another story for another day. Did a lot of good for him. Ended up becoming his fractional chief marketing officer and ran marketing for his group, for several of his groups for a year or two. I learned all kinds of stuff. But Carlin is a master storyteller. That's one thing. That's one reason why I'm working with you, because you're a good storyteller and I'm not. I'm learning. I'm working on it. But one of the inspirations for that is Carlin. Carlin is a great storyteller, and he builds relationships with people easily and entertains people, but not just as an empty entertainment. He uses his storytelling as a means to educate and ultimately sell. So he's the guy that says telling isn't selling.
Right.
Asking questions is, right? Selling is involved in asking questions. But anyway, here's the thing about Carlin. You look at his stories, you get to know him. Right now, he just seems like this incredibly successful guy. He's got beautiful primary home. I've stayed in his home. I've stayed in his guest home. I've stayed in his mountain home. He's got an 8,000 square foot mountain home that has, I think you can see, 100,000 acres or something, and there's only like one house visible from his front porch. It's amazing. These big floor-to-ceiling views. He's really doing well. And you see somebody like that, and you say, well, I guess he's just always been successful. But he hasn't. He's been bankrupt. Has had employees and partners embezzle from him and really mistreat him. He has been through some really rough patches in his life. The thing that I learned from him is you've got to overcome fear and failure. There's resilience. He gets knocked down and he gets back up and he keeps fighting, and he's really succeeded.
Okay, right.
But another thing that I learned from Carlin is, and you hear the same idea from Alex Hormozy or from Gary Vaynerchuk, a lot of people say it's all about volume. Find something that works and then do more of it. Do more of it. So when I met Carlin, I think I was making $40,000 or $50,000 a year, probably.
Right.
This is a while ago. And he was spending $100,000 a month on Google Ads. This is back when Google Ads weren't really a big thing. Not very many people knew about Google Ads. He was spending $100,000 a month. And for those of you that are not good at head math, that's $1.2 million a year on Google Ads. That's not to count magazines, radio, direct mail, list buying, email marketing, all kinds of stuff. He was spending because he figured out a formula that worked, and then he just did more of it. And it's been that way. Again, he finds something that works, and then he just goes after it with everything. And volume always wins, and that's a recurring theme.
Yeah,
like most people are playing too small a game. Like, look, if you can do it at this scale, why not? You're gonna have to do it a little differently. You have to learn things, but why not do it at this much bigger scale? So storytelling, overcoming fear and failure, trying new things, and then once you figure out something that works, you just pour the gas on it, and that's worked really well for Carlin. He had some bumpy spots early in his career, but he got back up and has succeeded wildly. I've learned a lot of stuff from Carlin, but that's one thing I learned from Carlin.
Now, I don't think I caught on, or maybe I missed it, at what type of businesses he has?
So right now, it's mainly financial. So he has, last I knew, 800 or 900 independent advisors. This is not technically the right term, but he's sort of like a broker. Think of like real estate. You got real estate agents.
Yeah, right.
He's a
financial broker for
that's an oversimplification.
But
and he does several different kinds of things in the finance space, but it's all financial stuff.
Gotcha. Okay, very good. Who's next, Tim?
So I think number 4 is another local guy, Adam Anderson. And Adam and I are in a group called M3. I've talked about that before. We went out and did dog fighting over Las Vegas and drove exotic supercars and stuff like that. And Adam Anderson thinks bigger than just about anybody I know. So Adam is currently working on a moonshine distillery on the moon. He's going to make moonshine on the moon. And he's got a scientist from NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab on board. And he's got, it's not just like a pie in the sky talking about. He's raising a $200 million venture capital.
It's literally fund. Pie in the sky.
Yeah,
sure.
It's
literally pie in the
almost,
sky.
Almost, yeah.
Moonshine on the moon is the definition of pie in the sky.
But it's not just talk. Like he's actually doing something with it, right?
It's crazy,
He's raising $200 million for space investing fund, a venture fund. I think space and crypto and cybersecurity. He was recently on Necker Island with Richard Branson. Richard Branson actually gifted one of his organizations a ticket on Virgin Galactic, and he's involved in I think there's asteroid mining, and he thinks on a much bigger scale than anybody I know. He's the guy I talked about last episode where I went to him for advice about this $2 million deal I was putting together, which for me was pretty big. Like and he's like, well, it's easier to raise $10 or $20 million than it is $2, and so do it this way and I found that if you can keep your feet on the ground and still think big, some people just think and talk all day and don't actually do anything. But if you can do both, if you can think bigger and then actually break it down into action steps and pursue that goal, big things happen. And Adam is an example of that. He's had several exits. He's sold some companies that he's built and made a lot of money, and he's done really successful things. But he hasn't ever been content to just like keep up with inflation or, launch this next biggest thing. He's always thinking like 10 or 100x bigger than anybody around him. And that's something that I admire and I'm trying to get better at, thinking bigger.
So my question here on this one is, do you need to now learn, you go from coffee shops, you got to learn how to do moonshine on the moon.
That's right.
Meetings.
Or at least Necker Island. Like seriously, that's a key point. You've got to be in the room where you're going to be challenged, where you're going to meet people that are going to sort of propel you to greater heights. This guy is a master at that.
Yeah.
He hangs out with really successful, wealthy people, and he's figured out he'll fly to Singapore for a lunch meeting with some really important person.
Okay.
He'll go to Necker Island, and he spends money to do it, right?
He
the Necker Island,
right.
The way as I recall, the way that he met Richard Branson was some charity event where I think he had to spend $25,000 for dinner on Necker Island or something crazy like that, and it's like $25,000 for dinner. That sounds obscene.
Right.
But it's led to all these amazing things. He's gotten his money back many times over, right? And that was the beginning, and then he's gone on from there. And he's a really funny guy, sometimes profane, but very funny guy, and he just thinks differently than most people I know. He's got great stories. If we could do a whole episode.
Right.
We should get him on the podcast.
Right. That is the thing.
We need to get
whole
him on
episode
here.
with each of these folks.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
we should, ladies and gentlemen, let us know. Should we find each of these folks
there you go.
and ask them to be a part of it?
We could do that. All right, so that's Adam. Number 5 is Teresa Easler. She was one of my first coaches. Teresa runs a communication consulting firm.
So is she local?
No, she is out of Toronto.
Okay.
And she was.
But you hired her early on.
She was actually my first coach at Strategic Coach. So when I would go, so Dan Sullivan doesn't coach the entry level people, right? So you have to
level up a
little bit. So Teresa Easler was one of his associate coaches, and so once a quarter for maybe 5 or 6 years, I was with Teresa in Chicago and a cohort of maybe 20 or 30 other entrepreneurs that were up there, and I learned a ton from Teresa as well. But maybe one of the big takeaways from Teresa is that she, for me at least, normalized success. She normalized success. So my natural inclination was to sort of think about this level of success. And I know if you're listening, you can't see it.
Your blueprint was at a certain level is what you're saying.
Yeah. So
Psyche had you at a certain...
Yeah, like I'm going to succeed to this level, but not beyond. Not because I said I couldn't or I wouldn't. I just hadn't really thought about it. Like just my default was here. And I very distinctly remember one of the early workshops. Again, at this point, I was probably making. I was barely squeaking by at $100,000.
Okay.
Because you had to make $100,000 to join coach. That was the threshold back then, and I had just squeaked by that and she made this offhanded comment. It wasn't in her notes. It wasn't the main point. But she said, every one of you could completely shut down what you're doing, move to a new city, and within a few months figure out how to make $250,000 a year. And then she just went on like making her point.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, wait. I don't know what she said the rest of the day because I was thinking about that. I'm like, I've been building this business for 15 years, I'm not making $250,000. is that really true that we could just like start over and figure out how to make $250,000? Is that? And she just said it with such nonchalance. Like, of course, all of you know you could do that, and you could. And it really challenged my thinking about what I sort of was expecting.
Right. Yeah.
And I realized
how you normally thought.
And I realized that the skills that I had, the thought processes, the tools, the raw material that I had, she was right. I could have started over and built things much differently, much faster, much better, much more efficiently. And I could get to success a lot faster than what I realized. And it was largely a degree of setting expectations. And she did that again and again, where she just sort of normalized that, of course, you're going to succeed. And of course, why wouldn't you? Like, you have all these resources and you have all this knowledge and all this experience, and not like, just go do it. And I've noticed that about a lot of successful people. They just expect to win. And this isn't just a, woo-woo hocus pocus thing. Right. It's like this is another Dan Sullivan quote, your eyes only see and your ears only hear what your brain is looking for. And if you're looking for problems and adversity and conflict and people to hate you and people to take advantage of you, you're going to find all that stuff.
Right.
But if you're looking for opportunity and you're looking for the good in people and you're looking for opportunities to succeed and whatever, your eyes and your ears are going to find and see and hear those things. So anyway, she normalized success on a grander scale for me than what I'd looked at previously, and that was really valuable, among many, many other things that I learned from Teresa. So I got 3 more, but
we'll have to get them on the podcast, right, ladies and gents?
I would be remiss to not talk about my dad. I've talked about my dad before. In fact, he was a podcast guest. I talked him into the pod, and not your stereotypical entrepreneur. It's not flashy. Nobody thinks of him as this really successful person, but I think of him as an incredibly successful person. I said earlier, Dan Sullivan maybe has influenced me in my entrepreneurial journey, but in life, certainly my dad has more than anybody, as a lot of us can relate to, not all. Dad, I think I learned lots, but Dad is a really good decision maker, and he can somehow see the long-term implications of whatever it is that he's thinking about or working on right now. And he's the master investor, not just in stocks and bonds and mutual funds, but in thinking about how temporary sacrifice is going to set him up for future gain, not just financial, but relational and quality of life and all kinds of things. He's really good at making decisions with the long-term view in mind. He's really mastered his fear. He's a very calm, rational person, and whereas a lot of people like freak out about the idea of buying a business or buying rental property or whatever, like when he was 18, before he was old enough to sell it. I think he was 17 when he bought his first real estate.
Okay.
And then went to sell it and found out he wasn't old enough to convey title. He literally couldn't sell it. It's a funny story for another day, but he's learned how to take responsible risks. You do the research, you kind of master your fear, you do the analysis, and then you take that responsible risk with the long-term view in mind. And he's really good at making good, rational, thoughtful decisions. And that's one of many, many, many things I've learned from Dad. We could keep going, but we've hit our time limit. So
we might have.
Now we just need to get some of these people on the show.
Right, we do. I think that would be actually a brilliant thing. And if we talked good enough about them, Tim, hopefully they can listen to this and be like, hey, we said some nice things about you. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, the takeaway for this and the Grow with Tim audience is, what clues are the successful people in your life leaving for you to pull from? And I think one of the challenges that I had while thinking of this topic, as you came up with it, Tim, was making sure that I was strategically thinking about those clues rather than just going, yeah, I've met someone, I had a great experience, they're awesome, famous, and wow, it was cool to ride with them and get the guy with the black car and the sign.
Yeah.
But what do I need to be pulling away from that so I can grow with JDew, my new podcast? No, so I could grow with Tim. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll look forward to chatting with you on another episode or listening in, however you do that, at the Grow with Tim podcast, and we'll talk to you again soon.